I call this old school C++ C with classes. A lot of people do. Because you see all these C constructs like raw arrays, char star for strings, printf, just as you would have had in C, and then some classes. But you know what's interesting about this sample? It doesn't have any classes in it. When you start to really get your hands into some code, and you start ripping away loops and replacing them with algorithm calls, ripping away all the hard work of sorting out exactly how many characters to allocate on the free store in order to use strcat, and don't forget to add one for the null terminator at the end, and so on. And the sort of bones of the application show themselves to you with all that decoration removed. Very often there's a moment when you realize there are classes hiding in your code. When we were talking about function pointers, I mentioned you might have a virtual function from some kind of class that would be called, depending on your circumstances, you'd create a different object type, and that's what would result in you running different code. In this sample, which started out as one array of strings and one array of numbers, maybe those guys are classes. Maybe I have a class called string collection and another class called animal collection, and they can both inherit from some base class like collection. We have the idea of calling a member function like total that would add up all the numbers or add up all the strings. The idea of printing them all out in these loops. These could become member functions. C++ is an object-oriented language. You have objects. You have commonality. Say, this is my bank account, this is your bank account, this is someone else's bank account, and here's what they all have in common. When you start to bring your code into a more modern syntax, often because the commonalities come out more clearly, you can now see some architectural flaws where there should be objects. That is, everything was a special case because numbers are different than strings, because complex numbers or points x, y are different than just plain numbers. And when you start to take that away and gain a commonality because of your use, for example, of the standard library, that can expose to you, hey, I should maybe have some classes in this system. This demo would be even longer if I wrote those classes. It's an interesting exercise for you to try to say, how can I turn this into an actually object-oriented program as opposed to something that happens to be written in C++. Exactly where in your translation process this happens to you depends on the kind of code that you're taking over. I find when I get code that looks like C, I miss opportunities to make classes. When I start to turn it into real C++ code with strings, with cout, with using overloaded operators, with using algorithms, it pops out at me that these things are classes, and I naturally start to write classes and write in a more object-oriented style. You don't have to wait till the end to start to do that, but I guarantee you by the time you get to the end, you will be starting to think that way.